The shopping trip. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and Jack lay on his couch scrolling through his phone. Jack was 26, smart but famously lazy. His friends joked that he'd rather invent a machine to do his chores than actually do them himself. But Jack didn't mind. He was proud of his work smarter, not harder approach to life. Today, though, he was in trouble. His sister Emily had a birthday party that evening, and she'd told Jack not to show up without a gift. And not just any gift, but one she'd actually like. Jack had promised he'd get her something special, but he'd totally forgotten. Now, with only a few hours left, Jack had to find the perfect gift. Sighing, he pulled himself off the couch. Jack knew that the nearest shopping mall was his only option. Grabbing his wallet and keys, he left his apartment and walked to the bus stop. Trying to think of a creative way to solve his problem. The mall was packed, noisy, and filled with stressed shoppers, exactly the kind of place Jack hated. As he entered, he thought, there must be an easier way to get this done. But with time ticking away, he started to browse the shops, looking for something his sister would love. Jewelry, clothes, shoes, everything seemed either too expensive or too ordinary. He knew he needed to come up with something different, something Emily would remember. That's when he spotted an electronic store advertising a new virtual reality, VR, headset. Jack's eyes lit up. Emily was always talking about new tech, and he knew she'd love a VR headset. There was only one problem. It cost way more than Jack could afford. He checked his wallet and frowned. He'd have to come up with a different plan. Just then, Jack noticed a lucky draw sign near the entrance of the store. The sign said, "Win big, shopping spree worth $500. Jack grinned. If he could win the lucky draw, he could buy the VR headset easily. But he'd never won anything like this before. His brain started working. How can I increase my chances, he wondered. He noticed the entry box was stuffed with other people's tickets. It was just his luck, though, to spot a tired-looking sales assistant near the box, organizing the slips of paper. Jack's mind raced, and he suddenly had an idea. He walked up to the assistant with a friendly smile. "Hi, I was wondering, how often do you all collect these tickets?" Jack asked casually. "Every hour or so. People enter, and we make sure the box doesn't get too full," she explained, a bit distracted. Jack nodded thoughtfully and continued his shopping, all while keeping an eye on the assistant. When she moved to the back of the store to handle some paperwork, he quickly reached into his wallet and pulled out a bunch of identical entry tickets he'd found from previous competitions in the mall. Then, he filled each slip with his name and phone number and slipped them into the entry box, one by one, making sure they were spread throughout. Jack thought, with this many tickets, my chances are way better. He felt a bit sneaky, but he told himself that he was just being resourceful. Once he was done, Jack decided to wait. He browsed nearby stores, trying not to look suspicious. Finally, an hour later, he heard a voice on the store's loudspeaker. "The winner of the $500 shopping spree is Jack Evans!" Jack pumped his fist, grinning. With a new spring in his step, he returned to the electronics store and purchased the VR headset for his sister. He was so pleased with himself that he didn't even mind waiting in line. He could already imagine Emily's surprise when she opened her gift. Not bad for a last-minute plan, he thought. Later that evening, he arrived at Emily's party, gift-wrapped VR headset in hand. His sister's eyes went wide when she saw the box. "Wow, Jack, this is amazing!" "How did you manage to afford this?" she asked, clearly impressed. "Oh, just a little luck and some smart thinking," Jack replied, winking. Throughout the party, his friends and family kept complimenting him on the thoughtful gift. For once, Jack felt proud, not just because he'd pulled it off, but because he'd shown himself that he could do something special if he put his mind to it, even if it required a bit of bending the rules. As Jack left the party, he reflected on what had happened. He realized that when he truly cared about something, like making his sister happy, he could push himself to go above and beyond. Maybe I don't need to wait for emergencies to get things done, he thought. The next day, Jack decided he'd use this smart mindset to tackle other things in his life. He wanted to prove to himself that he could make a real change, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Moral of the story: sometimes all it takes to overcome challenges is a bit of creativity and a strong reason. If you find a purpose that matters, you can achieve things you didn't think were possible.
A day without technology. Ethan was known among his friends as the guy who could do anything, as long as it didn't involve moving too much. He was lazy, but he was also clever, always finding shortcuts and hacks to make life easier. Whether it was ordering groceries online or using apps to finish tasks quickly, Ethan's smartphone was like his lifeline. So, when his phone suddenly died one Saturday morning, he was in a real crisis. This was not just any Saturday. Ethan's best friend, Leo, had just moved into a new apartment and was hosting a housewarming party that evening. Leo had asked Ethan to bring some supplies, ice, snacks, and a speaker. Ethan had agreed, thinking he'd just order everything through an app, swing by to pick it up, and make a quick trip over. But now, with his phone dead and no charger in sight, Ethan felt stuck. He didn't have his list, he couldn't call Leo, and worst of all, he couldn't remember the address. Ethan spent a few minutes hoping his phone would magically turn back on, but it was clear he had to go without it. "All right," he muttered, "time to use my brain for a change." He decided to start by remembering the address, visualizing the location on a map he'd seen on his phone. After a few deep breaths, he felt confident he could get there. But what about the rest, he wondered. How am I supposed to buy supplies without my usual apps? First, Ethan needed to make a shopping list. Normally, he'd type it all into his phone, but now he had to rely on memory. He took a pen and a sticky note from his kitchen and wrote ice, snacks, drinks, and speaker. That part was easy, but without his go-to apps, he'd have to find a store that sold everything in one place, which would mean a lot of walking if he wasn't lucky. Ethan remembered a convenience store a few blocks away that might have most of the things he needed. He walked there, only to find out they didn't have the right snacks or a speaker. He felt frustrated, but he wasn't about to give up. "All right," he told himself, "this just requires some creative thinking." So he went to the cashier and asked if there were any nearby stores that sold small electronics. The cashier looked surprised but nodded, directing him to a shop a few streets over. By now, Ethan was starting to feel the pressure. He knew he had to act quickly if he was going to get everything before the party started. He arrived at the electronics store and found a small portable speaker, but it was way over his budget. Normally, he'd just check online for a cheaper option, but today that wasn't possible. Ethan thought hard. Maybe I can ask for a discount? He walked up to the salesperson and made his case. "Look, I know this is last minute, but I really need this speaker for my friend's party tonight. Is there any way you could give me a small discount?" The salesperson looked at him and laughed a little, but nodded. "All right, since you asked nicely, I can give you 15% off," he said. It wasn't much, but it made a difference, and Ethan happily paid for the speaker. One item down, 3 to go, he thought. Next, he needed ice and snacks. He knew of a supermarket nearby, but by now his energy was fading. Walking around town without a map or any quick solution wasn't something he enjoyed. But he told himself that if he got everything, he'd make it to the party on time. He arrived at the supermarket, found the snack aisle, and picked out Leo's favorite chips. The ice was a bit trickier. Ethan realized he didn't have a cooler to carry it in, and it would melt if he just walked around with it. He looked around the store and found an insulated bag that would work. Problem solved, he thought, pleased with himself. As he was heading out, he saw a sign near the cash registers. Free gift with purchase of 3 party items. His eyes lit up. He quickly grabbed a pack of cups and napkins, and at checkout he received a free drink cooler, a perfect addition for Leo's party. Finally, he had everything on his list. It had taken much longer than he'd planned, but he'd figured it out step by step. He walked to Leo's apartment, still feeling a bit nervous that he'd taken the wrong street, but after a few turns, he found it. When Ethan arrived at the party, Leo's jaw dropped. "Ethan, you actually got everything?" Leo exclaimed, surprised. "Yep, everything on the list, plus a few extra things," Ethan replied with a proud smile. The friends laughed, and the party went on, with the speaker playing their favorite music and drinks chilling in the cooler. Ethan felt a strong sense of accomplishment. He'd managed without his phone for a whole day, and had learned that he could still get things done if he put his mind to it. As the party continued, Ethan thought about how he'd relied on his creativity and problem-solving skills to make things work. Maybe he wasn't as helpless as he thought without his usual tools. Sometimes he realized it just took a little extra effort. Moral of the story: we don't always need technology to solve our problems. Sometimes a bit of creativity, courage, and clear thinking are all it takes to overcome challenges and succeed.
The surprise birthday party. Max was the kind of guy who loved relaxing and hated hard work. He was lazy but very clever, always thinking of ways to avoid too much effort. He liked things to be easy and stress-free. However, when his best friend Mia's birthday was coming up, Max wanted to do something special. Mia had always been there for him, organizing parties and helping him whenever he needed it. This time, he felt it was his turn to make her day unforgettable. But Max had a problem. He didn't want to go through all the planning and hard work of organizing a big surprise party. Planning a party meant finding a venue, sending invitations, ordering food, decorating, and, worst of all, spending hours making everything perfect. There has to be an easier way, Max thought. Max started brainstorming, thinking of a creative plan. He finally decided that instead of throwing a party at his house or renting a space, he would borrow someone else's party. He had recently seen a flyer for a big event happening at a nearby rooftop bar. This event was open to the public, and it had everything: music, food, and even decorations. Perfect, Max said to himself, grinning. He figured he could simply take Mia there, pretend it was all for her, and enjoy a party without lifting a finger. Now came the tricky part. He had to make sure Mia wouldn't suspect anything. Max sent her a casual text saying, "Hey, let's hang out tomorrow night. I'll take you somewhere special for your birthday." Mia, surprised and touched, replied with excitement. Max smiled to himself, thinking how smart he was. The next day, Max met Mia at her apartment, where she looked at him with a curious smile. "So, where are we going?" she asked. Max only winked and said, "It's a surprise. Just trust me." They took a bus to the rooftop bar, which was buzzing with people and decorated beautifully. There were lights, balloons, and even a big birthday cake on one of the tables. Max felt proud of his cleverness. "This is going to be easier than I thought," he thought, smiling. They entered the bar, and as soon as Mia saw the decorations, her eyes lit up. "Wow, this is amazing," she said. Max quickly told her, "Happy birthday, Mia. I wanted you to have an unforgettable night, so I planned this whole thing." Mia's face was a mixture of surprise and happiness, and Max felt relieved that his plan was working. As they walked around, Max made sure to stay close to the group of people he thought were also here for a birthday party. He hoped Mia wouldn't notice that the decorations and cake were actually for someone else. Everything seemed to be going well until Mia spotted a table with birthday cards and gifts. She pointed at the table and asked, "Did everyone leave those gifts for me?" Max hesitated, feeling a bit nervous, but quickly came up with an answer. Yes, I wanted everyone to bring something special," he said, trying to sound confident. Mia beamed with happiness and Max sighed with relief. Just when he thought he had succeeded, a tall man approached their table with a confused look. He glanced at Mia, then at Max, and said, "Excuse me, do you know Emily?" Max's heart skipped a beat. Who was Emily? He didn't know any Emily. He quickly thought on his feet and replied, "Oh, yes, Emily is, well, she's an old friend who helped me plan this for Mia." The man looked suspicious but nodded. He went back to his group, and Max sighed, feeling like he had just barely escaped. But soon after, things took a surprising turn. Mia noticed the DJ announcing a happy birthday song, and suddenly the entire bar began to sing. Mia looked thrilled, but Max's stomach dropped when the DJ called out, "Happy birthday, Emily!" Max froze, realizing his plan was falling apart. Mia turned to him with a puzzled expression. "Who's Emily?" she asked, clearly confused. Thinking fast, Max stammered, "Oh, right. Well, actually, this isn't exactly, our party." Mia's eyes widened as the truth became clear. "Wait," she said, trying not to laugh. "You brought me to someone else's birthday party?" Max scratched his head, feeling embarrassed, but trying to stay calm. "Well, yes, but think about it. We still get to enjoy everything. The decorations, the music, the food, it's all here. So why not just enjoy it?" Mia burst into laughter, shaking her head. Max, only you would think of this, she said, still laughing. She wasn't mad. In fact, she found the whole situation hilarious. As they were laughing, the group celebrating for Emily noticed them. Emily herself, hearing the laughter, came over with a friendly smile. "Hey, are you guys crashing my birthday party?" she asked with a playful grin. Max, realizing there was no way to hide it now, nodded sheepishly. "Yes, and I'm really sorry. I just wanted to give my friend here a great birthday without actually organizing a party myself." Emily and her friends laughed, finding Max's honesty amusing. Emily then surprised everyone by saying, "Well, you're welcome to join us. The more the merrier, right?" Relieved and delighted, Max and Mia ended up making new friends, joining Emily's celebration and having a great time. The night was filled with laughter, dancing, and jokes about Max's brilliant idea. At the end of the night, Mia gave Max a hug and said, "Thank you, Max. This was a birthday I'll never forget, even if it wasn't exactly planned." Max smiled, feeling both proud and embarrassed. He realized that sometimes even a lazy idea can turn into something wonderful if you just go with it and make the best of it. Moral of the story, sometimes even imperfect plans can lead to great memories. With a bit of courage, honesty, and humor, unexpected situations can become wonderful experiences. It's not about doing things perfectly. It's about making the most of what you have.
The Fitness Challenge. Ben was a 28-year-old who loved relaxing on his couch with snacks and TV. He was lazy by nature but had a sharp mind. While he avoided physical activity at all costs, he was known for his quick thinking and smart solutions to problems. But Ben's life took a surprising turn when his best friend, Jake, challenged him to join a fitness competition that promised a $1,000 prize to the winner. Jake, who was fit and active, knew Ben could use some exercise. "Come on, Ben, it'll be fun, and imagine what you could do with the prize money," Jake encouraged him. Ben's first instinct was to say no. The thought of running, lifting weights, or doing any kind of workout felt exhausting. But when he thought about the prize money, he reconsidered. Ben had been wanting to buy a new gaming console, and the prize would be perfect for it. He thought to himself, if I can find a clever way to win without all that hard work, why not? He accepted Jake's challenge, but he knew he would have to come up with some unique strategy. The competition was a month away, and Ben knew he was way behind the other contestants in terms of fitness. Some of them were regular gym goers, and others were sports enthusiasts. There was no way he could match their strength or stamina. However, he realized that the competition didn't just test strength. It also had mental challenges, like obstacle courses that required problem-solving skills and strategy. Ben decided to focus on these areas and started planning. In the first week, Ben didn't hit the gym like everyone else. Instead, he studied past fitness challenges on YouTube, watching each event closely. He took notes on how contestants managed the obstacle courses, how they saved energy, and where they often made mistakes. Ben noticed that most people wasted time on certain obstacles because they relied only on strength. He thought, what if I can use my mind to get through these parts more efficiently? By the second week, Ben tried simple exercises at home. He practiced balancing on one foot and used everyday items like water bottles as weights to improve his coordination. He even made a small obstacle course in his living room with chairs and cushions. He was training, but in his own way. It wasn't intense, but it was focused on the skills he needed the most. Meanwhile, Jake was taking the challenge very seriously. He worked out every day, lifting weights, running, and following a strict diet. He would check in on Ben, laughing at how relaxed his friend seemed. "Ben, are you sure you're preparing for this? You're not going to win by sitting on your couch," Jake joked. But Ben just smiled and kept his plans to himself. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. Ben felt nervous when he saw the other contestants warming up. They looked serious and strong, clearly ready to give their best. But he reminded himself of his strategy. Don't compete with their strength. Just focus on using your mind. The first part of the competition was a running race around the track. Ben knew he couldn't keep up with the others in speed, so he paced himself slowly, saving his energy. The other contestants sprinted ahead, but Ben stayed calm. "I'll need my energy later," he thought. By the time he reached the finish line, he was far behind, but he wasn't exhausted. unlike some of the faster runners who were already breathing heavily. Next came the obstacle course, which had several tricky sections: a climbing wall, a tunnel to crawl through, and a balancing beam. Here, Ben's careful study of past competitions paid off. At the climbing wall, instead of rushing, he analyzed the handholds and found an easier path up. He reached the top with minimal effort, while others struggled with a harder, straight-up path. When he reached the tunnel, Ben noticed it was narrow and awkward, so he used his arms and legs to push himself through smoothly. Some of the others, stronger but bulkier, got stuck for a few seconds, wasting energy. Then came the balancing beam, a section that many contestants were afraid of because it was narrow and high. Ben had practiced his balance at home, and he knew exactly how to keep steady. He crossed it slowly but surely, reaching the other side without falling. By this point, he'd gained some ground on the others. Finally, they reached the last challenge, a heavy sandbag that each contestant had to carry across the finish line. Ben knew this would be the hardest part, as he hadn't trained for lifting weights. But he thought quickly. He lifted the sandbag onto one shoulder and leaned forward, moving in small steps rather than trying to carry it straight like everyone else. This let him keep his balance without using too much energy. As he neared the finish line, he saw Jake and the other strong competitors slowing down, their faces red and their steps heavy. Ben, using his unique strategy, managed to reach the finish line close behind them. To his surprise, he found himself in third place overall. The organizers announced that he had won the third-place prize of $300. Jake looked at Ben in shock. "How did you do that?" he asked, still catching his breath. Ben just grinned. "I used my brain, Jake. I studied the course, saved my energy, and found ways to avoid wasting strength." Jake laughed and gave Ben a high five. "I never thought you'd make it, but you proved me wrong. You found a way to win on your own terms." The prize money wasn't the $1,000 Ben had dreamed of, but he felt proud. He hadn't just proven something to Jake, he'd proven it to himself too. His cleverness and focus had made up for his lack of fitness, and he realized that he didn't need to rely on shortcuts for everything. With the right motivation, he could accomplish things in his own way. Moral of the story: you don't always have to be the strongest to succeed. With a clear goal, smart planning, and creativity, you can overcome challenges and achieve your goals in your own unique way.
A volunteer's heart. Daniel was a 25-year-old who preferred to keep things simple and easy. He was smart and creative, but also famously lazy. He liked spending his weekends watching movies, reading books, and finding the easiest ways to do things. However, his mother, who worked at a community center, was constantly asking him to help with volunteer events. Daniel always had an excuse to avoid it, but this time his mom's words got to him. "Daniel," she said with a sigh, "you're so smart, and the kids at the center could really use someone like you. Just try it once. You might even enjoy it." She told him about a weekend event for underprivileged children who needed tutoring. They were preparing for exams, and volunteers were needed to help with math, English, and other subjects. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, but he already knew he wasn't going to do any heavy lifting. His mind began to work on a plan. Maybe I can set things up to make it easy for everyone. And for me, he thought. On Saturday morning, Daniel arrived at the community center. The building was buzzing with activity. Children were everywhere, some running around while others looked shy and uncertain. The other volunteers were busy setting up tables, arranging chairs, and handing out worksheets. Daniel quickly saw that he wasn't the only volunteer, but he did notice that most of the other helpers looked stressed. "This is exactly what I want to avoid," he thought. The first hour was chaotic. Kids were all over the place, and the volunteers were struggling to keep things organized. Daniel had only been there for a short time, but he could see the main problem. There was no structure. Each volunteer was handling things on their own, so it was hard to keep track of which child needed what. It was clear that everyone was exhausted, and he knew he had to come up with a better system. That's when Daniel had an idea. He looked around the room and noticed some old tablets in a storage cabinet. They weren't the latest technology, but they still worked. Daniel quickly spoke to the center's coordinator and asked if he could use them. The coordinator agreed, though she was a bit confused about his plan. Daniel then gathered the children and divided them into small groups based on their skill levels. He gave each group a tablet and downloaded a few free educational apps he knew were fun and engaging. He then assigned a different app to each group: math games for one group, vocabulary building activities for another, and reading exercises for the rest. Soon, the kids were completely focused on the tablets, solving math puzzles, spelling games, and short reading exercises. To his surprise, even the shy children were participating eagerly, and the louder ones quieted down, too engrossed in the games to make a fuss. For the first time that morning, the room was calm. The other volunteers were impressed and relieved. "How did you think of that?" one of them asked. Daniel shrugged, smiling. "I just thought it'd be easier if we kept them busy with something fun," he replied casually. But the day wasn't over yet. The center had also planned a small talent show where the children could present something they were good at. The problem was, the stage setup was missing and no one knew where to find the equipment for the show. The volunteers looked stressed again, and Daniel knew he couldn't just ignore the situation. He had another idea. Instead of setting up a formal stage, Daniel suggested they use a simple space in the corner of the room and decorate it with some chairs and colorful paper. He noticed that some of the children had brought toys, and he used them as props for the stage area. It looked improvised, but it worked, and the kids loved it. They now had their own special stage and couldn't wait to perform. The talent show went smoothly, with the children singing, dancing, and sharing their unique skills. The other volunteers thanked Daniel, telling him how much easier he'd made things. His mom, who had been watching, gave him a proud smile, clearly touched by his efforts. As the day ended, Daniel felt tired, but surprisingly satisfied. He hadn't planned to enjoy himself, yet seeing the kids laughing, learning, and being proud of themselves gave him a warm feeling he didn't expect. One child, a shy boy named Liam, walked up to him and said, "Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I didn't think I was smart, but you made learning fun." Daniel was taken aback, realizing the impact he'd had without even trying too hard. He had used his creativity to help the children and had given them a day they would remember. Before he left, Daniel's mom came up to him and said, "I know you didn't want to come, but you made a real difference here today. The kids were happy, and the volunteers were able to relax thanks to you. Maybe you'll join us again?" Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had always thought volunteering was just hard work, but he'd learned that it could be enjoyable and meaningful if he used his skills. He also realized that sometimes helping others gave back something valuable to him, too. Moral of the story: even small acts of kindness can make a big difference. By using creativity and a little bit of effort, you can make a positive impact in others' lives and find purpose in your own life, too.
The cooking class. Lucas was a 27-year-old who loved food but hated cooking. He lived on takeout and frozen dinners, convincing himself that cooking was too much work. His friends joked that he would probably burn toast if he tried to make it. But Lucas didn't mind. He was comfortable and saw no reason to change. That was until he met Sarah, a colleague from work who loved cooking and had an impressive talent for creating amazing dishes. Lucas wanted to impress Sarah and show her that he too could cook something special. So, when he found out she was hosting a cooking class that weekend, he saw an opportunity. If I can show her I can cook, maybe she'll see me in a different way, he thought. But there was a problem. Lucas had no idea where to begin, and he didn't want to embarrass himself. After some thought, he came up with a plan. "I may not know how to cook, but I'm smart enough to figure out a shortcut," he told himself. He went online and searched for simple recipes that looked complicated, hoping to make something that would impress Sarah with minimal effort. The cooking class was held in a local kitchen studio with about 10 other participants. Sarah welcomed everyone warmly, explaining that they would each prepare a different dish for a mini dinner party. She handed each person a recipe card and some ingredients. Lucas received a card for a pasta dish with a creamy mushroom sauce. He looked at the instructions, which had several steps, and sighed. There has to be an easier way to do this, he thought, eyeing the complicated ingredients. Sarah began explaining each step, showing everyone how to chop vegetables, cook sauces, and blend flavors. Lucas, meanwhile, barely paid attention. He had a plan. He would avoid the complicated steps and use only what he thought was necessary. Nobody will know the difference, he thought confidently. As everyone started cooking, Lucas looked around, noticing that the others were serious and focused, carefully following Sarah's instructions. But Lucas quickly chopped the mushrooms into large chunks, threw them into the pan, and added the cream without measuring. He thought he was saving time by skipping a few steps. However, his dish looked very different from what Sarah had shown them. Sarah noticed Lucas's creative approach and walked over, smiling. "Having fun, Lucas?" she asked, eyeing his dish. "Oh, definitely. I just thought I'd add my own twist to it," he replied with a nervous smile, hoping she wouldn't ask too many questions. She nodded, amused but a bit skeptical. "All right, as long as it tastes good," she said, moving on to check on the others. As Lucas continued, he realized that his dish was looking a bit strange. The sauce was too thick, the mushrooms weren't fully cooked, and the pasta was sticking together in a clump. His heart sank. He could feel the pressure building. He didn't want Sarah to think he'd failed. "Okay, Lucas, think," he told himself, taking a deep breath. He noticed a few extra ingredients on the counter: garlic, lemon, and some fresh herbs. Inspired, he quickly grabbed these and started experimenting. He added a squeeze of lemon to the sauce, hoping it would balance the flavors. Then, he finely chopped the herbs and sprinkled them on top to make the dish look more professional. It wasn't exactly like the original recipe, but it looked better. When it was time to present their dishes, Lucas felt nervous but kept his cool. One by one, the participants set their plates on the table. The other dishes looked polished and carefully prepared, while Lucas's pasta still looked a bit different. But he hoped his last-minute changes would save him. Sarah started tasting each dish, giving feedback and sharing tips. When she reached Lucas's plate, he held his breath. She took a bite, then paused, raising her eyebrows. Lucas could hardly look her in the eyes. "This is unique," Sarah said thoughtfully, smiling at him. "You added lemon and fresh herbs? That wasn't in the recipe." Lucas tried to play it cool. "Yeah, I thought it might give it a fresher taste," he said, pretending he'd meant to do it all along. Sarah nodded, clearly impressed. "It's different, but in a good way. You've added your own flavor to it. Sometimes, breaking the rules leads to something interesting." Lucas could feel his face turning red, but he was relieved that his dish hadn't been a complete disaster. But just when he thought he was safe, Sarah had an idea. "You know what, everyone? Since Lucas added his own twist to the recipe, why don't we vote on the most creative dish of the night?" The group cheered, excited by the suggestion. Lucas panicked. He hadn't expected this much attention. He looked around at the other plates, all perfectly executed dishes, and felt his confidence slip. But the votes came in, and to his surprise, many of the participants praised his bold choice to change the recipe. After everyone had tasted each dish, Sarah counted the votes, and the winner of tonight's most creative dish is Lucas, she announced, clapping and laughing along with the others. Lucas could hardly believe it. His accidental twist had actually worked in his favor. After the class, Sarah came over to congratulate him. "I'm impressed, Lucas. You took a risk, and it paid off. I didn't think you'd be so creative with the recipe. Maybe you have a hidden talent for cooking after all." Lucas smiled, feeling proud. He realized he didn't need to impress Sarah with perfection. Instead, he'd impressed her by trying something different and making the best out of a challenging situation. For the first time, he felt motivated to learn more about cooking, not to take shortcuts, but to enjoy the process. As Lucas left the cooking class that night, he thought about how he'd learned something new about himself. Sometimes he realized it was worth putting in a little extra effort, especially when it meant learning a new skill or sharing an experience with someone he cared about. Moral of the story: creativity and a willingness to try something new can lead to unexpected success. Even when things don't go as planned, a positive attitude and a little effort can turn mistakes into unique opportunities.
The lost phone. Alex was a 24-year-old who relied on his phone for everything. He was smart, but also a bit lazy, preferring shortcuts whenever possible. His phone was his lifeline for maps, reminders, ordering food, and chatting with friends. One Friday evening, Alex was getting ready to meet his sister, Sophie, for her art show downtown. Sophie had worked hard for months to prepare, and she had insisted that Alex be there for her big night. But just as Alex was about to leave, he realized he couldn't find his phone. He checked his pockets, his backpack, and every corner of his room. It was gone. A chill went down his spine. He was completely lost without it. Worse, he couldn't remember the address of Sophie's show. Usually, he'd just pull up the address on his phone and follow the GPS. But without it, he felt stuck. Panicking a little, Alex checked the time. The show was starting in 30 minutes, and he knew it would mean a lot to Sophie if he showed up on time. I have to get there somehow, he thought. Taking a deep breath, he decided he had no choice but to rely on his memory and creativity. First, he remembered that Sophie had sent him the gallery name a few days earlier, something like Art Collective. That didn't help much, though, since there were several art galleries with similar names in the area. But Alex remembered a detail Sophie had mentioned. Her gallery was near a large clock tower in the city center. Without wasting more time, Alex grabbed his jacket, left his apartment, and headed towards the city center on foot. It was a busy Friday night, and he was already feeling frustrated by the crowded streets. He missed the comfort of having his phone's GPS and wished he'd been more careful with it. But he pushed on, determined to make it in time. As he reached the city center, Alex spotted the large clock tower. Now he just needed to find the right gallery. He looked around, noticing a few galleries nearby, but none had signs for Sophie's show. Just as he was about to lose hope, he spotted a small flyer on a lamppost. It read, "Art Collective, New Talents Exhibit, this Friday, 6 p.m. He grinned, knowing he was close. However, the flyer didn't give a specific address, only a vague direction. It pointed down a side street, mentioning that the gallery was near the fountain. Alex sighed, realizing he'd have to keep looking. He walked toward the fountain, hoping for another clue. After a few minutes of searching, he felt more lost than ever. That's when he noticed a group of people carrying sketchbooks and art supplies heading down a narrow alleyway. They must be going to the show, he thought, deciding to follow them. The alley was dimly lit, and he felt a bit unsure about this new plan. But as he continued following the group, he saw a sign above a doorway at the end of the alley, Art Collective Gallery. Relieved, he hurried inside and immediately spotted Sophie's artwork displayed on the walls. He made it just in time for the opening remarks. Sophie spotted him and waved, a huge smile on her face. "You made it," she said, hugging him. "I was worried you'd get lost." "Almost did," he admitted with a chuckle, "but I wasn't going to miss this." Feeling proud of himself for finding the gallery without his phone, Alex stayed to support Sophie, admiring her hard work and dedication. He realized that, despite the struggle, he'd managed to solve the problem by thinking creatively and paying attention to his surroundings. Later that night, when he finally returned home, he found his phone tucked under his bed. He couldn't help but laugh at the situation. He'd spent hours panicking, yet he'd managed without it after all. Moral of the story: sometimes when we lose our usual tools, we discover strengths we didn't know we had.
The marathon. Eddie was a 29-year-old who had a reputation for avoiding any kind of physical activity. He worked as a programmer and spent most of his time in front of his computer, only getting up to grab snacks or coffee. His friends often joked that the only marathon Eddie would ever run was a movie marathon. But Eddie didn't mind. He was happy with his comfortable routine. One day, however, everything changed. His younger sister, Lily, came to him with a challenge. "Eddie, I signed up for a marathon to support the Children's Cancer Foundation," she said. "It's in 2 months, and I want you to run it with me." Eddie's first instinct was to say no. Running 42 kilometers sounded impossible, especially for someone like him who barely ran to catch the bus. But Lily's words hit him hard. She explained that the marathon was a charity event to raise money for children's cancer treatment. She'd set up a donation page and already had sponsors. Lily's dedication inspired him, and he didn't want to disappoint her. He agreed reluctantly, but he knew he'd need a plan if he was going to survive the race. Eddie decided he wouldn't transform into an athlete overnight. If I'm going to do this, I need a strategy, he thought. Instead of intense training, he focused on studying the route, learning how marathons worked, and understanding what he could do to make the race easier on himself. He researched shortcuts, hydration stations, and rest areas along the route, noting every detail. Over the next few weeks, Eddie put in minimal training, walking around his neighborhood and doing some light jogging. He also kept a journal where he mapped out where he'd rest, where he'd grab water, and even where he might walk instead of running. His goal wasn't to win or even to impress anyone. His only aim was to finish without collapsing. Finally, the day of the marathon arrived. Eddie showed up in his running clothes, already feeling nervous. Everywhere he looked, people were stretching, warming up, and getting into the zone. They looked focused, determined, and in much better shape than he was. Lily gave him an encouraging smile, but she couldn't hide her concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Eddie?" "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, smiling nervously. As the race began, Eddie kept a slow pace, carefully watching his steps. He reminded himself of his plan: run the first 2 kilometers, then walk for 5, then grab water, rest at the park, and so on. His approach was far from typical, but he felt confident he could stick to his strategy. By the 5th kilometer, he was already feeling tired. He watched runners pass by him with ease, but he didn't let it bother him. He knew his plan would get him through, slowly but surely. At one point, he reached a park with benches, just as he'd planned. He sat down, took out a small energy bar from his pocket, and munched on it while watching other runners fly by. Let them run, he thought. I'll see them at the finish line. As the kilometers passed, Eddie's approach continued to work surprisingly well. He would jog for a short while, then switch to a brisk walk, keeping his energy steady. At each hydration station, he drank water and cooled down, allowing himself time to recharge. It wasn't fast, but it kept him going. However, as he reached the 30-kilometer mark, things started to get tough. Eddie's legs felt like lead, and every step became a challenge. He could feel himself running out of energy. He thought about giving up, but remembered why he was doing this: to support Lily and the cause. The thought gave him a burst of motivation. In a moment of desperation, Eddie noticed another runner struggling nearby. She looked exhausted but determined. Eddie walked over and introduced himself. Her name was Maya, and she explained that she was also running for charity but was close to giving up. They decided to help each other, keeping each other motivated with light conversation, jokes, and encouragement. Eddie realized that his lazy pace was actually helping Maya too, allowing her to continue without pushing herself too hard. The two of them tackled the remaining kilometers together, encouraging each other through the toughest moments. Whenever one felt too tired, the other would suggest a short break or tell a joke to lift their spirits. It was no longer just about the race for Eddie. It was about helping Maya cross the finish line, too. Finally, as they neared the last stretch of the marathon, they could see the finish line in the distance. The excitement of the crowd, the sound of cheering, and the sight of the finish line gave them a final boost. They looked at each other, grinned, and pushed forward with all the energy they had left. With the crowd cheering them on, Eddie and Maya crossed the finish line side by side, exhausted but ecstatic. He couldn't believe he had made it. He, the guy who barely exercised, had finished a marathon. Lily ran over, her eyes shining with pride as she hugged him tightly. "You did it, Eddie. I knew you could," she said, beaming. Eddie laughed, out of breath but thrilled. "I couldn't have done it without my strategy, and without Maya," he admitted. As he reflected on the race, Eddie realized that he'd learned something important about himself. His determination, creativity, and willingness to stick with his own unique approach had helped him accomplish something he never thought possible. He understood now that he was capable of more than he'd given himself credit for, and that sometimes, even when you start with the smallest steps, you can finish big. Moral of the story: with a clear goal, a solid plan, and determination, even the toughest challenges can be overcome. Taking things at your own pace and helping others along the way can turn a difficult journey into a meaningful achievement.
the charity event. Oliver was known among his friends as a master of shortcuts. He was the kind of guy who could finish tasks quickly, but only if he found a way to avoid hard work. Now 30, Oliver had a comfortable life, but his family always told him that he needed to use his intelligence to help others, not just himself. He usually ignored these comments, but when his grandmother, whom he loved dearly, asked him for a favor, he couldn't say no. His grandmother's community center was struggling financially, and they were hosting a charity event to raise money. She asked Oliver to help organize it, hoping his clever ideas would make the event a success. Although he disliked putting in too much effort, he didn't want to disappoint her. "I'll do it," he said, hoping he could somehow handle the work with his usual minimal effort. The charity event included a bake sale, a silent auction, and a raffle. Each activity required planning, coordination, and a lot of hands-on work. But Oliver had a different plan. "I need to find a way to do this smartly, not exhaustingly," he thought. Instead of setting up everything himself, he decided he'd create a system where others could contribute while he supervised from a distance. Oliver began by designing a few digital posters and sharing them on social media, inviting people to donate baked goods, auction items, and raffle prizes. He cleverly set it up so that anyone interested in helping could fill out a form online, listing what they'd contribute. Within a few days, his inbox was flooded with responses. To his delight, local bakeries, small businesses, and even neighbors volunteered to bring in cakes, artwork, gift cards, and more. He'd barely lifted a finger, yet the event was coming together. However, there was still a lot to manage. On the day of the event, the community center was buzzing with volunteers and guests, all excited to participate. Oliver's grandmother looked thrilled, thanking him repeatedly for all the hard work he'd put in. But Oliver knew the real work was only just beginning, and things were about to get challenging. As guests arrived, a problem quickly arose. The bake sale was overflowing with goods from different people, but no one knew the prices or where to pay. Oliver hadn't thought about setting up a proper payment system. The volunteers looked confused, and customers started getting frustrated, asking questions Oliver didn't have answers for. Thinking fast, Oliver grabbed a marker and paper, creating a donation box sign and placing it near the bake sale table. He told the customers that instead of fixed prices, they could donate whatever they felt was fair. The guests loved the idea, and surprisingly, they ended up donating even more generously. Relieved, Oliver moved on to the next challenge. Just then, he heard a commotion near the silent auction. Someone had brought in a beautiful, hand-carved wooden chair as a prize. People were admiring it, and the bids were getting higher. But Oliver realized he had forgotten to provide bid slips or a clear way for people to write down their offers. Guests were scribbling on random pieces of paper, and it was becoming chaotic. In a flash of creativity, he borrowed a whiteboard from a nearby room and set it up beside the chair. He created a simple chart where people could write their names and bids with a marker. This not only solved the problem, but also attracted more attention, as guests could see the bids increasing in real time. The bidding war grew more intense, and by the end, the chair sold for far more than Oliver had expected. Feeling pleased, Oliver started to relax until he noticed a line forming at the raffle booth. Guests were supposed to buy raffle tickets, but Oliver had forgotten to prepare enough tickets, and now the volunteers were scrambling. Worse, some guests were asking for change, but there was no cash box to handle payments. Desperate, Oliver searched his bag and found a stack of blank note cards. He quickly turned them into makeshift raffle tickets, asking guests to write their names and phone numbers on each card. Then he spotted a donation jar nearby, which he repurposed as the cash box. To keep track of the money, he borrowed a volunteer's calculator and made sure the donations matched up with the number of raffle tickets sold. It wasn't ideal, but it worked, and the guests appreciated his quick thinking. By the end of the night, Oliver was exhausted but proud. Despite all the unexpected problems, his quick thinking and resourcefulness had saved the event from disaster. The community center had raised more money than they'd expected, and his grandmother was overjoyed. She gave him a big hug and said, "You have no idea how much this means to us, Oliver. Thank you for using your talents to help us." As he looked around at the happy guests and volunteers, Oliver felt something he hadn't expected: a sense of accomplishment. He had put in more effort than he'd planned, but it felt worth it. He realized that sometimes even a lazy person like him could make a difference when it truly mattered. Later that evening, as he was packing up, a few guests approached him, thanking him for organizing such a unique and memorable event. "It wasn't perfect," Oliver admitted with a laugh, "but it all came together in the end." One of the guests replied, "That's what made it special. You found clever solutions when things didn't go as planned. Maybe next time you'll even enjoy doing it." Oliver grinned, considering the idea. He had spent most of his life avoiding hard work, but now he understood that there was a certain satisfaction in putting his cleverness to good use, especially when it helped others. Moral of the story: sometimes challenges bring out the best in us, even if we prefer to take the easy way out. With creativity, a bit of effort, and a willingness to adapt, we can turn difficult situations into meaningful successes and make a real impact in others' lives.
Thank you for watching our video. Keep practicing English every day and you will see great improvements. Remember, every small step you take brings you closer to mastering the language. Happy learning!